So today we have a panel about the LGBTIQ in Latin America cinema. We have 4 guests today, this morning, and I want to introduce them one by one. We have Pato Spanov. She works in the cinema industry, in cinema festivals and in national distribution, and world distribution, specialized in independent cinema. She presents 6 films per year, feature films and documentaries. Also, we have Eve Tabashnik. She's been in the cinema for over 10 years, and she's a jury, project assessment and panelist in festivals in the US, Mexico, Chile, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, Spain, and China. She is in charge of the program of the South American, of the Palm Springs and LA Film Festival. She is a curator of short films for LTF and the initiative Filmmakers for the Future for teenagers all over the world, and who encourages the development of their careers in the cinema industry. Also, we have Clarissa Navas. She's a scriptwriter and a director from Argentina, from the University of Las Artes in Buenos Aires. She manages production, the mini-series of La Niña, and she used experiences living in a marginal neighborhood. And also, she wrote a feature film, La Cinta a las Tres. So she has been in documentaries and series, and now she's in international projects for her second feature film, La Cinta a las Mil y Una. Also, in her career as filmmaker, she teaches at the Cinema School in ERC and National University of Northeast. Also, we have Gabriela Sandoval. She's a producer, cultural manager, programmer, and founding manager of Storyboard Media, responsible of the foundation in 2005 of the Santiago Festival of Cinema. Also, she conducts the industry festival. She's managing director of Amor Festival LGTB+, carried out in 2016 in Santiago de Chile City. So let's give them a warm welcome. Thank you. So, the intention today is to talk about the challenges of the cinema, but not just in this context of the pandemic, but also to have a broader gaze, how each one from your different profession or profile, how you believe, how difficult or complicated or easy maybe inclusion of LGBT cinema may be in festivals and in commercial environments. So we can start with Patra. What perspective, what are your opinions about this?
I just want to be sure that I will answer the question correctly. Are we talking about globally or for Latin American, for the Latin American territory, or for Latin American films? Are we talking globally about LGBT films, or?
Well, the ideal thing would be, LGBTIQ, in the Latin American context, but also on an international level.
You have to define a little bit the genre, if you can call it like this. We are talking about art house cinema with LGBT stories inside it. So at first we are thinking of the film as an art house film, where it has to be placed like every other art house film, first in the festival circuit, gain fame and talk with distributors that are interested in it. So you first see the film as an art house film, And then as an LGBT story, so that you can attract specific distributors who are taking a very special care of this kind of films. And also in this case, when we're talking about distributors who are doing LGBT-themed art house cinema, even in this section, there are smaller categories like people, companies that take films for video, or let's say more sexy films. It's not bad, it's just that the audience are liking this kind of movies, or those who are interested in the films because it's more behind that, they are supporting also the communities. There are a lot of different ways to approach people that are interested to buy these kind of movies. It also, I had the experience within the LGBT-themed art house films that there are distributors who are interested in taking films, any kind of homosexual love stories, let's say, or life stories, and some who are interested only in gay films, that they would not take lesbian stories, because especially if the story is a little bit more not lesbian and happy, they have problems to approach the lesbian audience. So there are a lot of things to think about and to consider when you approach with a product, if I may say, if I may talk for a film like this, to its company who could be interested to buy or should be interested to buy this kind of films.
Okay.
Then we'll have a round later, but commenting on each one. But Eve, what can you tell us about that? How have you, well, what's your perception about, well, for example, a program in LGBT films in Latin American context? Well, it hasn't been a long time ago that I've been playing through different roles. I've been 20 years programming for festivals in the US and also in Latin America, in Cartagena. I'm the senior programmer of the Palm Springs, Seattle, and in Minneapolis. But the LA festival, I'm no longer there. I have to tell you, but since a couple of years ago, I've been again in production, and I'm in this project called Valentina, which can be found in the library, which is a Brazilian film about a trans teenager that has to go to live in a small town in Brazil, in the countryside, and she has to face the different obstacles to try to be who she is, and she's a teenager, as anyone can be. So I'm going to talk from the two different positions I represent, and I'm going to start with Valentina because, well, I joined the production at the end, but it's interesting as a case study how Valentina starts financing in Dilma Rousseff's time, so a time when there was a support to cinema in Brazil, but especially well, LGBT projects. And they take 7 years to make it. So Valentina couldn't be made nowadays because they are, although this kind of funds are censored, the funds for this kind of stories. And I'm talking about Valentina, and here I'm trying to link together these stories. But as a programmer, I present films in festivals, especially in the United States.
películas LGBT de todos
LGTB
lados
films
de
are from
Latinoamérica.
all over in
Pero a
Latin
la hora
America.
de salir
But
a distribuir, digamos,
when we have to distribute them,
no conseguimos un agente de
we
ventas.
don't have a sales
nos
agent.
encargamos
We
nosotros.
cannot find it,
Y
and we
nos
do it
encontramos
ourselves.
con
And
lo
we
que comentaba
find
Patra, ¿no? Que de
what
golpe nos
Patra has
decían
said,
literalmente,
that
como esta es una película
they were saying,
de
since
una
this is a film
adolescente trans, es una
about a
película
trans
sobre una
teenager,
historia,
so it's a
por decirlo así,
story,
trans,
so to say,
dicen, no,
transgender.
las películas
And they
trans
say, oh, the
no,
transgender film.
no venden tanto, no, el mercado
they
no.
don't have quite a
Y
huge
entonces
audience,
empezás a
so
darte cuenta, y
not
esto
good for the
después lo
market. And
conversaba
then you
con
realize, and this is something I talked
productor Pablo Ingercher,
about
que
with
ha
Pablo
producido otras
Ingercher, who
películas
produced
LGTB,
other LGTB films,
cómo empieza a ver
how
digamos, está
well,
el
you have
nicho dentro del mercado
the niche
y cómo
inside the market,
el mercado empieza a marcar
and
la
the
pauta
market
de lo
starts,
que, digamos, de lo que supuestamente se necesita en
deciding
esto
what
del
you need
contenido LGTB.
inside the LGTB content.
El obstáculo concreto
And
de
well, the
tu
hurdle
película
of, well,
es trans,
your
entonces
film is
no hay
transgender,
como
so
un mercado suficiente.
you don't
Nos
have
pasó
a market that is
conversación
broad
con una
enough. So this
plataforma de
happened
Asia,
in an
que
Asian
directamente nos
platform
decía,
that
el
said us straight away 80%
membresía,
of all our members,
es VOD,
of our membership, because it's
son,
VOD,
gays,
they
y
are
lo que
gay,
quieren es ver películas gays,
and they
entonces
want to watch gay
necesitamos
films.
algo de contenido
So
trans,
we
pero
need
no
a little bit of trans content, but just a little bit.
con lo cual,
So,
y digo, podemos hablar de muchos
I mean,
aspectos.
we may talk about many different aspects, but
Evidentemente, en los últimos 10 años
obviously
ha
the
habido
last 10 years,
muchísimos progresos.
we've
Uno lo ve
we've
en
made great
términos
progress, and you can
de
see this in
temática,
terms
en
of
términos de alcance
topics,
y de proyección
of
del cine
for the
LGTB.
projection
Lo he
of
visto como
and
programadora,
of
lo he
the
visto
scope.
como audiencia y
And
ahora
I've
lo
seen
veo
this as a
como
programmer, as an
productora.
audience, and now as a producer.
Sin embargo,
But
lamentablemente,
unfortunately,
también al mismo tiempo que han habido estos progresos,
even if we can
también hay
see this kind of
retrocesos, como en
progress,
el
we
caso
can
de
also see that we've gone backwards,
Argentina,
especially in the case of Brazil.
si bien
In Argentina, even if
hay digamos, apoyo en general
we
a las
see some
películas,
general
igual
support
hay una
to this
situación
kind of
que
films,
hace
there
que
is
la
the
complejiza.
situation
Hablaba
that
con un
makes
productor,
things
el productor de la
complicated. I
película
was talking about
Las Herederas de
the
Paraguay,
Las Herederas from Paraguay, the
me
producer
comentaba lo difícil también que
of
es
this film, and
conseguir,
he was telling me how
digamos,
difficult it is to get
primeros fondos,
the first
por supuesto, porque
financing,
es
first funds for this. Of
sociedad
course, because it's
conservadora.
a conservative
Y por otro
society
lado,
there.
digamos,
And
de
on
nuevo,
the other
hay
hand,
lugares donde esto
there are
se
places
ve un poco más facilitado. Sin
where this is
embargo, y acá vuelvo a
easier.
decir,
But
hay una especie como de,
there is this kind of
digo, de como cierta pared en
we-
relación a
you-
lo que,
well, you
entre
find a wall
comillas, pide el mercado.
regarding what the
Y el cine
so
LGTB
well,
que
what they
intenta
tell
hacer
us the
una
market is
disidencia y
demanding,
un
no?
espacio para que
But
existan todas las
well, they're
posibilidades, inclusive, digamos,
supposedly they have this
acumulen más
space to
letras
include all
que el
the
LGTB, digamos, que es
possibilities,
el espacio
including
donde
more
exista esa fluidez.
letters than
El mercado
LGTBIQ.
empieza a imponer,
Well, the market starts to
de
impose
nuevo,
once again
etiquetas,
these
y uno
labels,
empieza a encontrarse
and you
con
start to
estos,
find
escollos a la hora
these hurdles
justamente de la distribución.
when
Igual
distributing them.
puedo decir en el caso, por ejemplo, de
I can
Valentina,
also
que
say in the case
logró
of
venderse a
Valentina,
una
the film,
plataforma
that
en
we were able to sell it to a platform in
Latinoamérica,
Latin
por otro lado
America,
se vendió
and on the other hand
Japón,
also to
a
Japan,
Suecia, va a
Sweden,
estar acá en España,
also in Spain,
en Movistar.
in Movistar.
Pero hablando
But
con mucha gente, inclusive
when
gente
talking to many people, even
amiga,
people, I mean,
querida, etcétera, que como digo,
dear friends,
te plantea
close
esto de,
friends,
bueno,
well,
pero si
they
es,
tell you, oh, but
si
I mean,
es de lesbiana, sí,
if
o
it's
si es
about
de-
lesbians,
y- o
yes,
si es de trans.
or
Y
maybe if
volviendo
it's
a un
transgender.
ejemplo que me dio
And
Pablo,
back to an example Pablo
él
gave me
comentando
when
con
talking
un posible productor,
to a possible
le decía,
producer.
lo que pasa es que
He was
querríamos,
telling
lo
me,
que
oh,
nosotros
but
queremos
what
es
we
la
want
historia de
is
los gays,
well, the
cowboys
story
que se
about the
encuentran en la
cowboy
montaña y dice, bueno,
gays
esa
who
película
find,
ya
well,
se
he
hizo,
meet in the
es
mountain, and it's like,
Brokeback
well, we already
Mountain,
made
ya
that
está,
film,
ya
it's
pasó,
Brokeback
y
Mountain, and
dice, bueno, pero
I
eso es lo
mean,
que vende, ¿no? Es como
let's
un
move
poco-
on. Oh yes,
Entonces
but
es
that's what people want to see.
interesante, y creo que estamos acá
That's
por
what
eso,
I think it's interesting, and that's why we're here,
entender
to understand
que,
that,
por otro lado, el
on
mercado
the other hand,
se maneja
the market,
con la posible
well,
audiencia. Y entonces, gran
how
parte de
it
nuestro
does
esfuerzo
with the
colectivo
possible
tiene que ver
audience,
con
so
crear
part
esas
of our group
audiencias
has
que
to
van
do
a
with
estar empezando a
creating
pedir
those audiences
esas
that
nuevas
start
historias,
demanding new
de nuevas
stories,
incidencias, etcétera.
well,
Porque
new
tal cual como
happenings.
estamos,
Because as
los
the way we are, well,
son,
the
digamos,
spaces or the
se
niches
estrechan.
are
Bueno, perdón que
becoming
me extendí, espero que
very tight or
sido
very
claro.
small. I'm sorry for how long I took here, but I hope I was clear.
Bien, sí, has tocado un buen punto y justo eso quería hablar con Gabriela.
You touched upon an interesting topic, and I wanted
Gabriela, por
to
ejemplo,
tell
desde el
Gabriela.
punto de vista de un festival,
In a
que
festival,
un festival
Gabriela,
de cine LGTB,
well,
imagino también se
LGTB
presenta esta
festival,
dicotomía, ¿no? O sea,
we have this dichotomy
películas, digamos,
with
comerciales, de
commercial,
temática, y
mainstream
películas más de
films,
autor,
and
¿no?
more
Entonces, es cierto,
independent
quizás
films.
hay películas que se hacen pensando ya
So
en
there
que,
are films that are made
digamos, historias más light, más
with
rosas para
lighter
público,
or more
pero también
juicy
hay
stories
historias,
for the
más
big
transgresoras,
audience,
¿no?
but there are
Que
more
quizás sean más difíciles de digerir para el público. Y
controversial stories.
Eva tocó un punto importante, lo de
So
educar
she
al
said
público.
something important,
Los
which
festivales de
educates
cine
the
tendrían
audience.
esta
Do you
misión,
think
o,
the film festivals have this mission
justamente con la variedad de historias, de
with the
temáticas
variety of
LGTB,
stories
¿podemos
and
educar al público o
topics?
siempre
Can
vamos
we
a llegar al
educate
mismo
the audience,
nicho,
or we will always
nuestro
reach the
público ya
same niche, so
convencido, digamos?
our convinced audience all the time?
Creo que los festivales,
I think
y principalmente,
that the festivals,
por ejemplo, los festivales
especially
LGBT,
the
la idea es que, o sea, nacen también por un tema político,
festivals
¿no?
are
Social.
born
O sea,
out of a social and
empezamos a tener
political
como
will. We
empezar a
start
reflexionar a través de temáticas y en los distintos
well, to
países como que
reflect
nacen a causa
upon
del
different
tema para
topics
evitar
that
el
are
tema del
born
odio,
or
la
to avoid
homofobia, o
the
sea, poder
hate,
reeducar, ¿no? Porque hay mucha
to
ignorancia
try to
y
educate
de falta de
people, because
educación,
there is a
muchas
great
veces eso
ignorance,
genera el tema de la discriminación y el
and
odio.
that
Por
generates
ejemplo,
discrimination
Amor
and
Festival
hatred. For example,
se creó por eso,
Amor
¿no?
Festival
Porque hay
was
muchas
created
demandas
because of that,
sociales,
because
o sea,
there's a
la
great
mayoría de las
social
películas
demand
generan
for
esta
that. No,
narrativa
most
que van
films generate this
reflejando lo que está
narrative that
pasando
reflect what's
socialmente,
happening
¿no?
socially.
Y que tenemos que ir avanzando como en
And
leyes,
we
¿no? Que
have
son
to
derechos,
move
que los
forward
derechos
with
tienen que ser
rights and
iguales
laws, and
para-
the rights have
para
to be the
todas,
same
todos,
for
Entonces,
everyone.
creo que ahí la función de los
And I think
festivales
there,
es, claro, va a tener un nicho
well, we have a
cautivo,
function,
como
we
decís
have a
vos, un público
captive niche,
objetivo, pero por
no,
otro lado la idea
this
es
specific
poder ampliar
audience,
una
but the idea is
audiencia,
to broaden
poder
that
entrar a
audience,
reflexionar,
to
poder hacer
reflect
como si
upon
se hacen
that,
esfuerzos colectivos para
to
poder
make a
llegar
collective
también
effort
a distintos
to
públicos,
try to reach
porque el
different
cine lo que
audiences.
sí tiene es una herramienta
Because,
súper
well, the
interesante,
film
a
has a very
diferencia de otras
interesting
artes,
tool
que
compared to other
entretiene por un
art,
lado, pero
because it's
te puede
entertaining, but
ayudar
at the same
a través
time,
de los
it
contenidos
can
a humanizarnos,
help you through
la idea
contents
como
to
sociedad, ¿no? Y a
humanize as
reflexionar
a
sobre
society and
distintos
to
temas.
think
En
on
Latinoamérica,
about different subject
lamentablemente,
matters.
los derechos,
In Latin America,
tanto de
unfortunately, the
mujeres, de
rights, both
diversidades,
human, the
etcétera, siempre,
diverse,
y culturales,
diversities,
siempre
etc.,
están-
and
no son
cultural,
temas de Estado, sino
it's
políticos.
not
Entonces, siempre
a state
estamos
thing,
en
but a
riesgo,
political
¿no?
thing. So,
Por tal gobierno de turno, por
so
tal
we depend
esto,
upon
empiezan-
the
y uno de los
the
festivales,
political party
creo que en
that's
este caso
governing,
la
etc.
cultura y
And
los
I
que
think in
hacemos cine,
festivals and
producimos
for
cine,
us that
uno
are
piensa
inside the
eso
cinema
como una
industry,
herramienta política, ¿no?
you think
No
about
estoy
that
hablando
as a
de
political
partidismo, sino como
instrument
de
or a
acciones.
tool, no?
Y desde ahí los
And
festivales
well,
crean
from
este
there,
espacio
the
de
festivals
contenido
create
sobre
this
temáticas diversas,
space
¿no?
about
Y
different
también como contenidos de foco,
topics,
de
and
temas que
also in
necesitamos
focus contents of things we
reflexionar
need
con el público,
to
o, por
think
ejemplo,
about
en el
with
caso
the
de
audience.
Chile,
So, for
el
example, in the
matrimonio
case of Chile,
igualitario,
no,
el
the
tema de poder generar mayores leyes y
equal
mayores igualdades para la sociedad. Temas también
matrimony to
pensados
generate
desde,
laws that are fair
que
to all
seguramente
society.
lo
And
va a
I'm sure
explicar mejor,
Clarissa will
la
be able to
pertinencia
explain
de la
this better,
temática,
that
¿no?
how pertinent
Hace lo que
the
hablaba
topic
Eve
can
o
be.
también Patra, ¿no? Hace 10 años
So
atrás,
10 years
quizás,
ago,
el tipo de cine o la
maybe the type of
representación que
cinema,
había en el
its
cine, tanto
representation,
de trans,
also in
era
well in
distinta,
transgender, it
¿no?
was
Eran
a different thing.
actores heteros haciendo
So we're talking
de
about
trans,
straight actors playing
y eso
trans
no representa, ¿no?
actors,
También
and this
vemos
is
esa
something
como
that doesn't represent.
heteronorma
So
que hay
we
en
have
el cine
this
también desde el feminismo, pero
was
también
this rule
desde las
for straight
diversidades. Entonces,
people,
donde los públicos
or
necesitan
the
sentirse
audience
identificados.
need
Entonces, desde
to
los
relate
festivales
to
también
what
se
they
trata de
see.
programar
So in
desde
festivals
ahí.
we have to
Creo que las
build
nuevas voces que
from
salen en
there. I think the new
Latinoamérica
voices
tienen
we have in
mucha
Latin
más
America
conciencia sobre la pertinencia
have
de los
more
contenidos y
awareness
cómo
about
contarlos y
how
cómo poder llegar a un público mucho más
appropriate the
amplio que
contents
se
are
siente
to try to reach a
identificado,
broader
¿no? Porque
audience
dentro de
that
las
can relate to
diversidades
what they
sexuales hay
see.
diversidades
Because
también.
there's a diversity
Las
in
mujeres
each
somos
audience.
diversas,
The women are
los seres somos
diverse,
diversos y no existe un solo patrón.
and I think there is
Eso
no
creo que es
pattern.
una de las funciones claves
And I
de los
think that's
festivales. Por
one
ejemplo,
of the
con Amor Festival decimos,
the
esperamos
keys
no
of a
estar cumpliendo
festival.
30 años, porque significa que como sociedad no
If,
hemos
if
avanzado.
I mean,
Nacimos
sometimes we
por
feel
un
that as a
objetivo
society we
específico, de
haven't
poder
moved forward. We were born
visibilizar los
with a
contenidos, poder
specific
reflexionar, poder
aim.
hacer que
We wanted
se
people
sientan
to reflect
identificados
upon the
las
contents, to
diversidades y
relate for the
también
diversities, to relate to
familias,
what they
amigos
see, and
empiezan
also
a generar
that our
contenidos,
friends
¿no?
start to
En
generate
entender que
content.
somos y hay una diversidad enorme como
and to
seres,
see,
y
well,
creo que
how
desde ahí
diverse we
buscamos
are.
como
And I
festival.
think that
Entonces,
that's what we intend
me
as a
preguntás,
festival.
creo que cada
So
uno de
you
los
were
festivales
asking me,
que
in
nacen en ese
each of
sentido,
the
claro,
festivals that are
tienen
born
esa misión,
with that
pero
aim,
creo
well,
que
they
va
have
más
that
allá de
mission, but I
como
think that
decir,
it
si
goes
tengo un público
beyond
que
saying,
consume
if I
cine
have an
LGBT,
audience that is
sino que va como una
consuming
misión mucho más allá,
cinema
¿no?
that goes
de
beyond
poder,
LGBT, with a mission of
reflexionar o de poder romper
reflecting upon
paradigmas,
or breaking
estigmas sociales
paradigms,
que también generan todos estos temas de
social
odio, ¿no? Y
paradigms
que
that are
incluso
also
en la pandemia,
tackle with this hatred
vimos que muchos
topics.
países
And also with the pandemic, we
retrocedieron
saw
en
that
esos
many
derechos, ¿no?
countries
Como
went backwards
el
with
tema de
those
discursos de
rights,
odio
no, with the
avanzaron
hatred
muchísimo. Bueno,
statements
pasa en
and
España, ¿no? Que ha habido
well, it happens in
casos
Spain,
de
right? We
violencia,
had
y pasa
violence
mucho en eso, y creo que los
cases.
festivales tienen esto, ¿no? De
And
poder
in the
como
festivals, we can see
visibilizar
that we
y
have to
poner
raise
temáticas
awareness
que ayuden
and to,
a
well,
reflexionar y también
use
incomodar, ¿no?
subject
a la
matters that
sociedad a
make
través de eso.
society uncomfortable and that help them
Te respondí también
think.
un poco la-
And I'm not sure if I answered you, but I talk too much as
Y
anyone from
lamentablemente tienen
Argentina.
tres
You
hoy,
should
o
know
sea,
that.
no. Pobre Clarissa.
I'm really
Te
sorry
explayas, Clarissa, te explayas.
to ramble so much.
Bien, Clarissa, ahora pasamos
Okay,
contigo.
Clarissa, now we move on to you.
Tú como cineasta
As
ya,
a filmmaker,
de hecho tienes ya 2 títulos
well, you have already
de
two
temática o historias
titles
lésbicas.
for lesbian stories. You have
Yo
two
me imagino
different
que como
titles.
realizadores,
And I guess that
siempre la
the
premisa va a ser,
filmmakers
contar esa historia que
always
yo
start
quiero
from
que llegue a
telling the
pantalla.
story that
No estás
you want to
pensando en
put
el
on a
mercado,
screen. You're not
digámoslo así,
thinking
¿no?
about the market.
Más espontáneo, más natural y
And well, the
auténtico
more
sea,
spontaneous,
mucho mejor.
natural, and authentic it is, the better.
Para ti, el proceso de
So for
hacer
you, the
estas
process of
historias,
making these stories,
¿te fue complicado
was
en
it
el contexto de que
complicated?
estamos en
And I mean that we are in
Latinoamérica,
Latin America,
donde a veces los gobiernos
where
no
sometimes the
le dan, mucha
governments,
pelota a la cultura,
well,
¿no? O no hay muchos
don't
apoyos,
help the culture this
en
way
general
so
a la
much.
cultura, y peor
In
si
gen-
es una historia LGTB, ¿no?
And even more if we're talking about an
¿Proceso
LGTB
tuviste ese tipo de
story. In your process, did you
complicaciones?
find
O más
this
bien,
hurdles,
¿cómo fue que
or
lo
how was it? Tell me.
Bueno, creo que las complicaciones
I think that
en general,
the
¿no? Hacer cine de
complications
cualquier
in
temática
general,
es
making
complicado
cinema is already
en
complicated
Latinoamérica,
in Latin America,
pero principalmente
but,
creo que
well,
el tema
mainly
LGBTIQ+,
the
en mi caso se
LGBTIQ
sumaba
subject
también
matter even
el
more
hecho de
so,
estar muy
and in
lejos de
my
Buenos
case I
Aires,
was
de estar en el nordeste de
very far
Argentina,
away
donde
from Buenos
para
Aires in the northeast of
producir cine
Argentina, where
es muy
producing
difícil porque,
film
lógicamente,
is
está muy
very
mal
difficult
repartido y
because
está todo centralizado
everything
en
is
Buenos Aires.
centralized in
Entonces,
Buenos Aires.
en la primera película,
So
que
the
era
first
una
film,
película,
which was
de fútbol femenino
about
con chicas
female
que eran mis
soccer
compañeras del
with
equipo.
the colleagues
La
from
mayoría no había
my
actuado antes,
team. Most of
la
them
historia tenía,
hadn't
bueno, muchos
performed
componentes
before, hadn't
lésbicos,
acted
entonces,
before.
tanto conseguir
Most of
apoyo
them
para eso
had a
era muy
lesbian
difícil.
element, so producing that was
Y fue
difficult
una película hecha
from
con
the
muchísima,
beginning. And it was a film that was
muchísimo
made
amor
with great
colectivo
affection
y sin prácticamente ningún
and
financiamiento.
without any funding,
Y
practically
en el
any funding.
caso,
And in the case,
para que se pudiera lograr
well, so that
postproducir,
we could
fue muy
produce the
importante
film.
la
It was
ayuda
very
que tuvimos del
important the
Festival
help we received
Asterisco,
from
que
the
justo
Asterisco
era un
Festival, which is a festival
LGBTIQ+, de
LGBTIQ
Argentina,
from
porque ese
Argentina,
año
because
había
that
sacado
year
una sección de Work
they
in
had a
Progress,
section of
y
work in
entonces ahí
progress,
la película
and there
era muy complicado que
well,
consiga
it was
apoyo,
complicated
siendo
to
todo
receive support in the
Corrientes,
film,
muy joven, y sí el festival
being from such
eligió,
a
le dio
young
los premios de servicios y gracias a eso
crew.
pudimos
And well,
terminarla.
thanks to this
Pero
festival's
luego con,
help, we were
con
able
las
to
demás películas
finish.
también siempre
And also with the rest of the films,
aparece este problema
we
o
always
esta
have
tensión
this
con el
problem
mercado, que un
of this
poco
tension
decía
with the
Eve,
market, as Eva was
porque por un
telling
lado
us. Because on the
también
one
el cine
hand,
siempre dependen en Latinoamérica, ¿no?, de las políticas de turno,
we always
digo, el
depend
apoyo
upon the
a
different
cuestiones que tienen que ver
political
con
parties,
con
and
la
I'm talking about the
disidencia o con los
support
derechos.
with the
Entonces, ya que
rights
estamos
and the
supeditados
dissidents.
a eso,
So we depend on that.
que puede ser, ¿no?, vientos a favores por
And
ahí,
we are
por ahí
talking
no,
about, well,
pero lo del mercado
tailwinds
siempre
or
es una
not.
tensión, porque lógicamente que las personas que
But of
producen, por lo
course, the
general,
people that produce,
la
generally
aproximación
speaking,
no es
their
desde
approach
una
is
convicción
not
de lo,
from a
no sé,
full
de la defensa de lo
conviction of
queer, o
defending queers or
lamentablemente, por lo general,
whatever. So
no
unfortunately,
existe tanto
generally
eso,
speaking,
entonces
we
sí
don't
es
have that.
como tener en cuenta, bueno, a ver qué es lo que está,
So
qué
we
es lo que
take
está
into
requiriendo el
account
mercado.
what
Y
the
ahí
market
empiezan a venir un
requires,
montón de
and there
condicionamientos.
you have
Es muy
different
difícil
luchar contra eso o sostener algo.
different
Yo
things,
recuerdo que en la
set of
película, en Las Mil y
conditions. I
Una,
remember in
tremendo,
Las Mil y
una
Una film,
distribuidora en un momento
we had
dado
this
me dice,
distributor that told
bueno,
me
está
at a certain
bien,
point, well,
vimos el
it's
corte de la
good.
película,
Well,
están
we
bien
like the
las
film,
chicas,
we like the
pese al
actresses.
barrio pobre,
In
son
spite
agradables, ¿no?
of the poor neighborhood, they are quite likable. And I was
Como, "Ay, no
surprised
puedo
to, oh my
creer,
God, well,
no,
what
me
kind
da
of a
ganas
comment
de-
is that?
no, de dar la película
No,
a un
I
distribuidor
didn't want to give my film to
directamente,
any
y esas cosas
distributor
creo que
at
todo el
all.
tiempo están,
And I think we can
hay
find
gente que-
those
que las
things
dice, pero
a lot.
también
There are
muchas
people
otras que
that
quizás
say
lo están
that,
pensando y
and
no
many
lo dicen.
others don't say it but
Y
think it.
creo que ahí
They have it in
entran
their
un montón
minds, and
a
I
jugar un montón de
think
cuestiones que
that
tienen que ver con la
many different
clase,
things
que
come
tienen que
into
ver con
place.
esto
There has to do with
de un
the
cine por
social
ahí que
class, with
no- que se corre
cinema that
de esa raíz elitista que en un punto
that
en
has this
Latinoamérica, digo, quienes hacen cine por lo
elitist
general son
stripe.
personas de una clase muy privilegiada.
No,
Entonces,
because the cinema
si uno no
many times
pertenece a
are
eso
from a
y
privileged
encima,
class, and if you
no
don't
sé,
belong,
actores, actrices que no
well,
son
and then you're an
conocidos
actor or an actress that
y que a la vez
are
no
not
pertenecen a esa clase,
popular or
todo
well
empieza
known,
a
and you don't belong to
dificultar
that
más
social
la
class,
posibilidad
this
de
makes
que la
things
película
even more
exista, ¿no?
difficult
Y que hablar
for
si
your
uno
film
quiere
to
empezar a meter
exist, and
cuerpos
if
que
you
son,
want to
disidentes también, que se
start
corren de la
including
hegemonía.
things that
Creo que esas cosas,
are
inclusive
not
en el
what is
mundo
considered normal.
LGBTIQ+, muchas
Even in
veces
the
se espera, ¿no? En
LGBTIQ,
los hombres,
sometimes
¿no?
you
¿Cómo
expect
no
a
va a ser,
certain things, I think,
musculoso?
in
¿Cómo no
men.
va a
Of
tener un
course, he
buen
has
físico?
to
¿Qué esta persona
be
le
very
pone acá?
fit
No.
and muscly, and
Entonces,
So, I mean,
digo, cuando uno va explorando o
when
corriéndose un
you
poco
explore and when you,
de esas normas, se va complejizando también
well, when you
la
go
cuestión y lógicamente que el
adrift
financiamiento es más
those
difícil
rules,
de
you find that the
conseguir
funding
y
becomes
la
more difficult to
distribución.
get, and the distribution.
Entonces creo que
So, and the
hay
distribution
muchísimas
too.
cosas, ¿no? por
So
las
that there are
cuales
many
seguir
things
luchando y también
why we have
tratando
to
de
keep
que,
on
de
fighting,
que esas películas
and we have
tengan
to
una
try
cabida
that
en
those
otros
films
espacios.
can fit
Ahora, por
different
ejemplo,
spaces.
estoy acompañando el proyecto de
Now I'm
una
with the
amiga
project of a friend.
que
I'm
es
helping her.
de al lado de mi provincia,
That
de
is
Corrientes,
just in
detrás
a
de
province
Chaco, actúa
nearby
también en
in
Las Mil.
Chaco. And she
Y
was
trans,
an actress
ella,
in my film. She's
actriz,
transgender, she's an
y quiere
actress,
dirigir una película,
and she wants to direct
pero
a film,
lógicamente
but
sin ningún tipo de
of course
medio,
without
de
any kind of
posibilidad de hacerlo.
the
Entonces, de
possibility of
pronto,
doing so, any
me
kind of
pasa de ver
means. And
muchos proyectos en Argentina que tienen
there are
un
many
personaje
projects in Argentina
trans,
with
un
one
cupo trans,
transgender
por
or
decirlo, pero cuando de pronto existe
character,
el
but when
deseo
you
real
have
de una
the
persona
real
trans que quiere
desire
dirigir
of a
una película, quiere
transgender
hacer,
person
nos
wanting to
encontramos
direct
que
a
en
story,
Argentina prácticamente no hay
well, in Argentina
directoras
you
ni
don't have
directores trans,
directors
entonces
that are transgender,
oportunidades,
so the opportunities
se empiezan a ver que están muy,
there you can see
muy
that are,
vedadas para
are-
muchas personas que no pertenecen
are pretty
finalmente a
scarce
esa esfera
for the people
del
that don't
privilegio.
belong to that privileged class.
A mí me gustaría decir algo en relación
I'd like to
un poco
say
a lo que,
something
sobre todo lo que
in
comentaba
line
Gabriela de
with what
la
Gabriela was
creación de
saying
públicos y
about
la transformación de
creating
estos,
audiences and
vamos a decir, 20
transforming,
años.
well, the transformation
Yo
of the
creo
20
que
years.
el advenimiento de la
I think that with
muchos
the,
más festivales
well, the
dedicados
upcoming
al
of
cine
many more
LGBT, yo creo
festivals
que
dedicated to
realmente
LGBT
ha
cinema
fomentado
has
la creación
encouraged
y
the
la
creation
circulación de contenidos.
and
Y creo,
circulation of
digamos,
this
de
kind
cuando
of
yo empecé
content.
a programar,
Since I started
digamos,
to
había algunos
program,
festivales
we had some
que
festivals
estaban, digamos, en el mundo,
that were
pero el hecho de
already
que hoy
existed in the
hoy
world,
haya
but
un
the fact of
circuito
having this circuit
sólido,
that is
potente,
solid and powerful,
diverso inclusive,
diverse
porque no son
even,
todos iguales,
because they are,
conjuntamente
each one
con
is
otras
different,
políticas y con
together
otros
with other
apoyos,
policies
etcétera.
and support,
Pero
of
así
course.
como en
But
general el advenimiento de muchos festivales hizo
the
que
happening
el
of all
cine
these
circulara más,
festivals
en
and
el caso, bueno, de lo LGTB o
in
de
the
las
case of
mujeres o del
LGTB
cine
or
indígena, pero
women
quiero decir,
or
en el caso de lo
indigenous
LGTB
films.
es
But here,
clarísimo,
LGTB, this is
yo lo he visto en
something
estos últimos, no digo
that is
20 años
clear.
de-
I've seen this.
no es lo mismo el panorama
It's not the same thing, no,
hace
the
20 años
current
y ahora,
arena
y el
than
saber,
the
el
20
que
years ago,
la
and
persona que hacía
knowing
una
that the person
película de
that
contenidos tuviera
made a film with LGBT
espacios,
content, that
eso
they
cambió
had
completamente,
a space.
este,
This changed.
lo que se podía hacer y obviamente fue
What we can
creando
do
los
has
públicos. Creo que
changed, and of course the
es-
audiences
no
have
podemos
been
hablar hoy
created. So we
del
cannot
cine como lo
say,
vemos
talk
hoy,
today about
sobre
the
todo el cine
cinema
LGTB,
as we see it
sin
today, especially
pensar en
LGTB, without
todos esos
thinking
espacios
about
que se
all
han,
these
pero
spaces that
multiplicado de una manera
have multiplied in a
maravillosa,
wonderful way.
tierras adentro inclusive,
No,
o sea,
even
en donde en un país había uno,
in
ahora
the
hay
mainland, and in a country where we had one, now we have
para mí
25
es
different spaces for this,
fundamental,
and
porque
this
tiene
is
que ver
essential for me,
directamente también con
because it also
la
has to
creación
do
de
with the
públicos, etcétera, y
creating
la posibilidad
the
de
audiences
experimentación,
and the
de-
possibility
bueno,
of
hay más
experimenting,
cantidad de festivales,
missing, and we have
etcétera. O sea, se va alimentando
Well,
una,
this is a circular
círculo
system.
muy,
No,
muy
you have
productivo.
a broader audience. You need more
Los
films, and
festivales han sido
this is a good thing. And I think festivals have been essential. In the afternoon, we'll talk about some festivals that are presenting proposals to have spaces for scripts, for work in progress. That is the other thing we need, so that the transgender gaze is reflected. And also there's been progress, as Gabriela and Clarissa said. At the beginning, the films were, in many cases, made by straight people or realized or directed by them. And this is due to the, well, this has changed. Now you can see the cast and crew and the directors are queer. Though we have editors and PODs and directors that are queer. So not just the content of the story is LGTB, but also the person that is telling the story and the crew, especially because we can see a different experience there. No? But I think all of this is thanks to the existence and the happening of these festivals, that somehow we're able to navigate the change in policies. Because sometimes, well, something you don't find it in some place, you find it in another place. And so the content of these stories are becoming more and more important, and people are more aware of them. And some people I was talking to before this, this panel, I wanted to know more about other people's experience, and to the extent that a transgender, a gay, a lesbian, or whatever, their orientation, when you start seeing this in the big screen, you raise awareness, they want to, you create a desire for them to be there, to tell their stories. So it's not that there are more people like that, it's like people, well, feel the need to tell their stories because they can relate to what they see. And so that's why we are seeing more of this. And I'm very positive in light of what's happening and what will happen. I think this is increasing in spite of all these hurdles. You talk about the market, etc. Thank you. Patra, I wanted to ask you, well, we have two questions actually. From the distribution standpoint, there are more festivals than some years ago in Latin America, LGBTIQ festivals. So, from the distribution standpoint, this means that there's a broader demand for this kind of films, or not. And from the standpoint of a distributor, when you see that there are more productions in Latin America of this kind of films, do you feel that outside of Latin America there's a demand for these stories because of the particular context in Latin America, because they are different? How do you perceive this as a distributor?
You mean by increasing the production of LGBT-themed films, if I have the feeling that the market is getting broader so that we will have more audiences and the distribution would... I'm sorry, should I wait? Do you mean that by having more LGBT-themed films coming from Latin America, if the audience is also broader so that our customers, our buying ticket audience is bigger, right? What is missing in Latin America is specialized distributors. And not only in Latin America, there are in the major territories, there are always distributors, not always, let's say Germany, US, UK, France, even Poland meanwhile. But when a country is missing specialized distributors, I mean, they should not take only, but they prefer and support them, there is a problem. And in Latin America, I personally don't know any. And it's also, what's also missing is organized or let's say a specialized VOD platform. I mean, with World Wide Web, you can get Gaola, for example, or there are also the big companies that have access also to Latin America, but still you don't have one there. And the audience, I'm not sure if the production is showing that the audience is getting bigger and bigger. I think the sexual orientation was always there and it's going to be more or less the same. If we are talking about people who have this sexual orientation and are interested in it, we cannot, let's say, like hetero audience that's going to watch such films will go there because it's a film. The people who went to see Una Mujer Fantástica, they didn't go there because they were transsexual. They went there because it was an Oscar winner or a Cannes winner film. So I'm not sure if the increased production, if it is like this, I'm not sure if really more LGBT films produced at the moment in Latin America has to do with increasing of audiences. I think I'm going also to markets and talking with people who are looking co-producers, so very early. I think in general, the Latin America cinema is very interesting anyway. And over also these successes you had, like Fantástica, people are also looking for this kind of films. So when in this stage where the co-productions are becoming interesting, get money from abroad and you make the films, you have already won. So I think this could be, I'm not producing, so I'm asking you that you are producing also. I have the feeling that this increased number of good LGBT products that are coming out and being made are more in the support of, let's say, interest of, in general, interest in Latin American very good value products. So this is my opinion, because for distribution you really need to have the, how you call that, not resources, the partners to work with. So a product will work if it's a good art house film, but not because it's an LGBT themed film. It could even be a problem. Let's say El Príncipe from Sebastián Muñoz, okay? A great film, a high artistic quality with a god Alfredo Castro in it. It was, I sold it almost everywhere. It is my best sold film ever. And besides of the partners of the production company countries, we did not release it in Latin America. It's too sexy, and the straight audience would not go easily in Latin America to watch this film. I don't know, what was your experience? I mean, she was distributing the film, so I may ask you now, perhaps you can elaborate on that.
Okay, por la duda. Nos fue súper bien. O sea,
It was great.
Bueno, también distribuimos cine.
We distribute cinema too, and we distributed El Príncipe in Chile.
And tocó la pandemia.
Well, we had to go. It was the times of COVID, so it was online. It was.
No saben lo que fue bajarla todos los días Y pirateada también
It has been
porno,
pirated
pirateada
all
online.
over the
Entonces,
world.
eso la estrenamos online.
So we released it online
DVD,
in
y tuvo muy buena
VOD,
respuesta,
and it had, well, a very,
agotó
it was
en
very
48
well
horas
received in
3.500
48
tickets.
hours.
Ha estado en
It
muchísimos
sold
festivales.
many,
Bueno,
many
hizo
tickets.
un gran trabajo Patra. Es un
And
recorrido
Patra
mundial
made a great
impresionante.
job all over the
Y ha sido
world,
bien interesante
and it
porque
was
ha
interesting,
generado
very interesting, because it
muchas,
generated
muchos Q&A, muchas
many
preguntas y
Q&A,
respuestas, y pensamos
where we
que
think
online
that
cómo iba a ser esa reacción.
how it would be received online. It did work, but it was more focused to a niche, which is what Patra was saying. It was very much focused on gay LGTB
Tratamos de poder abrirlo mucho más
cinema.
porque
So
tiene un
we tried
contexto
to open it
histórico.
up because it has a
Va
historical
mucho más allá.
context, so it
Y
goes beyond
ahora la
that.
vamos a reestrenar
And
en
now
salas
we're going to release it in theaters next month, I think, and well, to be able to be there too, because in Chile didn't go to theaters. And well, it's a fantastic film. It's the first film of the director, Alfredo Castro. He's a great director from Chile, internationally renowned, with an Argentinian actor. And it's a film that connected to an audience in Chile that I think a little bit more specific at the beginning because of, and thanks to Alfredo Castro, we were able to reach a different audience. And when we released in the pandemic, we had to live with piracy and pirate copy films. So every day we received a mail that we had to take it off a certain platform and denounce it. And so that was a complex thing to deal with. But, well, the films, and in the case of Chile, or for example, La Mujer Fantástica, after the Oscar, it was released again. But when it was released before the Oscar, it didn't have such a broader audience as it had internationally after the Oscar. Films, generally speaking, in the world do great, and in the case of Chile, it's difficult to connect with the audience, to be a blockbuster. No, El Príncipe could have been a blockbuster because of the kind of film it is, of the subject matter it deals with, but online speaking and press-wise, yes, and 1 year ago we're going to release it again.
Thanks, Gabriela. Eva, before you talked about how difficult it is to when you produce a film, getting funding. Patre also said that it's not only because it's an LGBT story, it has to be a good story. A story that impacts people, that evokes emotions in people. In this sense, in Latin America, what do we need? What do we need for more of stories like this to be done? Outside of the fact that Latin America is more conservative, what can we do in terms of the industry for these stories to exist? Do we have to look for them exactly? What do we have to do for these films to Bueno, if I had the answer to that, I thought about what Sebastián Peña told me when I asked him about Las Herederas, which is a film, it's a fantastic film. I wanted to know what he had to say. And he has a definition. He said, we have productions, supermarket productions, because they have to go and find funding. Las Herederas, for instance, got funding from Brazil, Uruguay, Germany, France, 6 countries to make a film. So it's like going to the supermarket. So, and you got 20% funding from Paraguay. And I say this because I think that obviously we start with cultural policies that affects all kinds of cinema, not just LGBT cinema. And in all these forums, when we talk about cinema, when we talk about culture, And if we don't put this in the general context of more broader cultural policies where cinema is present in terms of education, cinema should be part of the school curriculum where children go to see films, documentaries, LGBT, science fiction, any kind of film. So that should be part of this kind of language that children are see from small. So when you say, what can we do as an industry? All kinds of support that exists and all the synergies that we can manage to get are going to add up. Because as Patra was saying, and I think here we all agree, that we are talking about stories. And the important thing is that good stories have to be told and many stories have to be told. Everybody will have their definition of what they consider to be good. But the difficulty is not only is whether it's LGBT or X or Y, but you have to generate these stories should have the gaze. Is it art house? Is it more personal? So although it's not just LGBT, it's going to be more difficult to find an exit in the market. As far as I'm concerned, the work is a collective effort. And in the last 5-6 years, precisely because when we see more and more content of this nature, I think it's a reflection, a collective reflection we all have to make. It has to do with generating publics, audiences, alternative spaces, multiple different places to find different places where to show this kind of cinema, creative spaces for new creators, alternative creators, meaning not just specifically, not specific places, and help for the circulation of this kind of content, because, like I was saying before, people who know, they don't want to go and see El Príncipe. Why? Well, they have to get accustomed people to get people accustomed to things. As a cinephile, you become accustomed to seeing certain kinds of cinema. It's not sort of from one day to the next. It's not overnight. People don't change their musical taste because you are exposed to something from small to different things. And the same thing will happen with cinema. I think it's very interesting, your question is very interesting, and is what we have to ask ourselves. How, all of us, from our different positions, how do we multiply and how do we take advantage of the different synergies? What are we doing? How can I get to more places? One of the things that the pandemic, you talk about the pandemic, but the possibility given to us by the pandemic in terms of the reach that films should have, I have seen it with Valentina, which was released in Outfest during the pandemic, and all the festivals that were through platforms, all those festivals, and all of a sudden we're saying, look, the film is reaching people that it would not have reached them otherwise. People would not have gone to Los Angeles to Outfest or Minneapolis, where in Latin America it won the Public's Prize. But we see audiences that it was reading to the entire state of Minnesota. But there are not many film spaces for LGBT cinema in Minnesota. So what I'm saying is opportunities were opened by this, and I think we have to continue exploring these possibilities and broadening them online. That's on the one side. But also, we also have to open our minds, open our heads to different things. Not only in terms of content, but in terms of creation of audiences, creation of spaces for support, because it is not just one institution, and we can't confer this responsibility to politicians because they change every so often. And that is very, very exacting, it's very exhausting. So I think in this respect, there already are many organizations and festivals. Festivals are wonderful things that are getting bigger, and they're also becoming distributors, producers, and they're beginning to have more complex roles in terms of production, distribution, and promotion. So that is why, for example, I'm very pleased that now, for instance, there's a formal presentation of a number of initiatives for the support of films that 5 years ago did not exist. There was probably forums here for co-production where there was one film that was about LGBT. But the fact that now festivals are now generating industry spaces for this kind of content to be multiplied, I think it's fantastic. I think these things are now beginning to happen, to emerge, these initiatives, and we are beginning to see that models that have worked for cinema in general now apply to LGBT content. I think that from now to 10 years, in the next 10 years, we're going to have lots and lots of films and stories that we can't even possibly imagine at this juncture. Because in terms of what you were talking before about dissidents, we are going to stop talking about Cs, lesbians, gay. I think it's going to be far more open, far more liquid, far more... I think young people today are far more open, and we can't even imagine what's going to be like in 90s. I think it's collective. Everybody has to have, within their own space, see how, I believe, a great deal in synergies. I think we have to come together. We have to look all the time at what we can do, see what somebody did that was good, how I can use that, use the different models and transport them or take them to those different spaces. And fundamental it is, we have to creation of audiences. I believe the idea of taking cinema to kids, to young people, LGBT cinema, all the kind of LGBT cinema can be seen. It's because it's the only way. It's the only way. And we haven't talked about this, but I think there are many festivals where the audience, the public, the average audience is of a certain age. There's a certain young public that we're not reaching them collectively. Not just LGBT, and that is what that concerns me. When I enter a theater, I see the age, the color of their hair, how they dress, and in general, unless you go to certain places, the kind of homogeneity that is, I find concerning, because there's a certain kind of public, very large, that we're not reaching, and it's that public that we have to conquer.
I had a discussion before we came in with regard, festivals are the alternative distribution for me when I don't reach a local distributor. What could be very helpful for this alternative distribution way would be a better organization of the local LGBT festivals or other events that are offering this kind of content. For example, in Germany, we have an organization of all LGBT, or let's say many LGBT festivals. They are called Queer Scope, and they help each other. So, for example, if I have a film that I want to place in Germany, and normally they don't care about local German premiere, I'm going to talk to all of them, and more or less, through their organization, you have the possibility to place the film in all major cities, what you would have done also with a normal distribution. So this is one thing that I think it would help a lot. I don't know if we have festivals in the audience, and you can think about it in your country if you can do that, because you will support the films, but also your work, because you are sharing also costs for translation and so on. And with regard to the younger audience, which is a big issue for all art house productions, I know that the Latin American society, I mean, it's perhaps, I don't want to be, how do you say that, prejudice? I have a prejudice? Anyway, I am Greek, so I know about this. It could be that it's conservative to place LGBT stories in children festivals. Okay, I know that the Scandinavian, I have a Brazilian film, it's called The First Death of Joanna by Clarissa Oliveira. It's about a 14-year-old young woman, a girl, who at the end it's also a coming-of-age story. And in Scandinavia, we placed it in festivals that they have also schools attending the screenings, or they are bringing the film to schools with education material. I know it's difficult, perhaps, with more conservative countries, but it's also a way both to reach younger audience and also open the mind of young people. Because, for example, Cristiano for her is very important. She made this film also because of the Brazilian situation, the political situation. For her, it's a politicum. She just wanted that people talk about sexuality. So if those 2 points could be somehow supported from the local, courageous, rebellious organizations of the LGBT community, that would be huge.
One question that would be for Gabriela and for Clarissa. In Latin America, LGBT cinema, I don't want to say we're trying to homosexually. I don't want people to think that I'm trying to homosexualize the world. No, but what I want to say is, you, for example, Gabriela, from your Amor Festival, do you feel when you see the films that get to you, here there have been LGBT people, it's better because it makes the story more authentic? Do you feel that is getting bigger with the years? What level of help does that give to the fact that there is a script writer who has done research on an LGBT character that is not guided by stereotype and inspired in a story that you've seen from Europe and not Latin America? Do you think these things really help to create better LGBT stories? Yes, I think the answer is also in your question. The fact that we are beginning to make more authentic stories, you realize that there's also lesbian cinema is not very well represented, and there was not a great deal of variety. But the fact that now that we can generate spaces to encourage films made by women, by dissident voices, I think that is very important. And now we are beginning to see such content because they are the result of things that happened 20 years ago. And you're also beginning to see themes that are more personal, wider registers, films that are in fact journeys, personal journeys. And I think that we are beginning to revise and see that the content is more authentic, and there's greater dignity in terms of presenting the characters, and that happens in all the genres. We are not seated at the table telling stories simply. We are living the story. You are very involved in a story. So it's not because if you are not, if you're hetero, you can't tell homosexual stories. I think there has to be greater belonging. We have to see how those films are represented. There's a greater sensibility, greater dignity, or different social strata. When you see stories in vulnerable sectors, it's not that there's a morbid interest in it. There has to be a more dignity, greater social and political interest. And I think that is extremely relevant. And their content, content during the pandemic, there was less because the pandemic blocked things a bit. But it also sort of work in progress. Festivals had to reinvent formulas for films to continue to be seen. For instance, in a Maud festival, we did 500% more, and we got throughout all of Chile, where there are no lots of cinemas. We got to places where there were not actual cinemas. So this year, for instance, it is focused on older people who before did not see themselves reflected in cinemas. So people usually say, oh, I'm 60, 70, you are closer to death than to life. So, but now, and at that age, you can't fall in love, you can't have a sex life. So we also have to look at things from that point of view, think more about content, and I think the pandemic, therefore, helped us to arrive at places where we didn't arrive before, and also we began to see what kinds of themes are not representative, and we started to search for those themes, love, that kind of content. And I think that Latin American cinema, like I was saying before, is now being more and more conscious, more and more aware in terms of young generations, and trying to generate greater diversity. And I think that through the different sections, through the different themes in festivals. For instance, next year the festival is going to be look at the LGBT cinema, but focus on people who are deprived of their freedom. Because people who are deprived of their freedom, also we have to see their sexuality and their diversity, because that is something that's very stigmatized. So every year we are looking for these different types of content, and like I think you were saying before, there have to be different alliances with NGOs to search for this kind of content. And I think it is more, we are being more and more, creators are more and more conscious and aware in terms of telling these stories. They're telling stories that belong to them, that are close to them, or in this respect, I think that the cinema always is a question of distance. What's the distance, the correct distance? And that has to do with dimension, aesthetic, political, in terms of what one decides to deal with. And I agree with you that there are many people that are close to these kinds of stories, but also I also read lots of projects in Argentina that directors, male and female, that have no kind of proximity to this kind of universe. And I can see that more and more. And I think that because of this question to do with markets, the market demands, we see more and more films that have nothing to do with queer films. It's a kind of speculation with a kind of something that's clearly there to be seen, to attract the attention. I think these things are happening more and more because there is a market that is calling for it. And I think it's a political question. How do we appear? How do we show ourselves? Because there's also a danger of banalizing things, banalizing everything that has to do with a certain way of life, a certain way of existence. It is more or less that, and how that is consumed. So very often I wonder, what do we do? What do we give to the world of entertainment? And I think there should be a kind of dignity in this sense. It's with the indigenous cinema. So much was done about the indigenous cultures, that the indigenous people could tell their own stories, and they should not be told by white people. And I think in terms of dissident voices, this is also, the same thing should happen. Films that made by people who have nothing to do with our world. I said, what is this? This is not the way it is. But that also has to do with building these spaces and creating opportunities and possibilities for people who belong to this community could make films. That's it. And just, I also wanted to add that I think laboratories are also very important to bring certain tools, because like Clarissa was saying, it's not that we are not going to tell people stories as a colonizer. How do I give these tools to these people for them to be able to tell their stories, not as a colonizer? So I think that those spaces are therefore very important. Industrial spaces, I think that when someone is in a position of power and authority as a programmer or a distributor or directing, I think he has a greater responsibility, ethical, moral responsibility to generate such spaces and to be able to choose new voices with themes that are necessary to tell those stories so that we can have greater variety. Now we're going to open the floor to the audience. So I don't know if we have anyone wants to ask a question to our guests today, to our panelists. I want to, the Premio San Sebastián, we've been here for 22 years, the Latin 10 years, we've seen all the Latin American production, and we see lots of candidates in the last 10 years. I want to insist on something, and then we see the films and we see how they move around in Spanish festivals, in Latin American festivals we've been to, and we see how they're released in each country. Something that hasn't changed from the beginning is when the distribution comes, it's always very difficult. It's always disastrous. The films are not very well taken care of. I could give you an example. Someone on the table, how his film was taken care of in Spain. Patria was saying, here we are at this moment. All the festivals, all the Spanish festivals and Latin American festivals can communicate via networks. And we have seen films from different countries present there that have not been released in that same country. We have to, it's also the industry. I mean, the industry and distributors in the festivals themselves, how those films are presented, taken care of, because there could be a circuit, a Spanish circuit of films, LGBT films, that it could happen in Latin America, because in terms of dates, I think that's possible. Festivals come one after the other. There are different climates, different temperatures, summers, winters. I think, and then that film can be, for instance, in El Príncipe could have a distribution in cinemas because it can reach wider audiences. And we have seen in the pandemics that we've seen different kinds of publics. There are lots of Spanish films seeing Peruvian films. So I think there's a pedagogical responsibility. At the end, we can start from the very beginning, from the premises, we can see that at the end, I think you've all said that you've had the experience where, as producers and directors, this is what happens. You've seen it, so perhaps it is. Perhaps I am being very angry, but here there are lots of people. You can do that. You can make that reflection and cause change in the next few years. Well, I don't know. We have to call for an alliance of festivals, LGBT festivals in Latin America, and do a forum or something. I think we can do something like that. That's an open invitation I launched. San Sebastián 2022, we can talk with people here from the industry and for instance, have an encounter. I think what you've said is true. I think a lot of what happens, not only here but LGTB cinema, there's a kind of limitation of resources because we're all doing the same, and when we what Patra says is a great example. When we know that today, in many cases, the festival is the distribution, and that's it. That's very clear. Let's do something. Let's get together. Let's come together, many more people, because that's what it is. That's important. Any other intervention, observation?
Yo igual coincido mucho con
I agree with Gabriela in the fact that LGBT festivals, we have grown during the pandemics, virtually, digitally. That helped a lot. Films were seen more by wider audiences, and also, for instance, trans films also don't have, not very widely seen. But my question is, how do we now that there's a kind of hybrid way of doing things because of the pandemics, how do we go back now to in-person presentation when there's little support? How can we reach the entire country outside of physically present festivals? You got to 100. Now you can see from about 3,500 people in a festival. So my question is, now that we see the reach, how do we go back to physical presence, physical presentation? Many people, how do they feel, since they feel safer in the virtual environment? The term virtual reality, we do work in schools with shorts, in monitors. So from this year on, we have a team that has sort of educational documents for professors, for teachers, for shorts, and we started to implement that, and it's been a good experience. And online, we got to far more schools with teachers, and we have the document there on them, on websites, and they're open access to everybody, for other people and other institutions, for sociologists, for educators to generate. So we talk about that. Now we are going to do other things, replicas, but with physical presence, with that mediation for audiences, more general audiences. So we are going to work in a territory, for instance, in Chile, El Mapu, where there are. We are in alliance with a festival in Mapuche, where they have worked on diversity in indigenous cultures, and we're also going to exhibit films there. So the virtual reality allowed us to get to those spaces, and now with this virtual reality, we are going to use those partners to be more physically present. Because afterwards, we always say, what happens after the virtual? You meet an Argentinian, he's going to talk about everything. So when it's physically present, the monitors, we can further guide and monitor conversations, exchanges. In 2019, for instance, in a school, we talked about diversity because there were lots of children who were in transit, that period of transition, and they publicly said in the course that what they were, and that was extremely enriching because the organizations were there, the mediators were there, and it was very harmonious, and that we took it into the virtual space, and we did that activity to accompany those children for that they could be able to express how they felt, what they felt, and all of it was very, 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 very comfortable, very good for them. The school took measures in terms of, for instance, the bathroom, so they could feel more integrated and more normal. So that on a smaller scale was very, very easy. And when we tried to do it online, it was a bit more difficult, but we used mediation. And so we are, I think, trying to reach a kind of hybrid reality. We're going to have 30% online, or 30 or 40%, and another percentage physically present. But we think the physical presence, these Q&As, these colloquiums are very important. Online cannot replace that. Online allows us to get to more spaces where there are no physical theaters, where people can actually go into a festival and see an LGBT film. They can feel, but in a festival, we also generating protocols and production to generate safe spaces against discrimination and bullying. And festivals in Chile have come together, and there have been a network of festivals where people talk about all of these questions, and there is a protocol for safe spaces for audiences and to generate those possibilities for more diverse encounters. And I think it's trying to return little by little, depending on measures in each country, health measures, but I think hybrid, we're going to have a kind of percentage that allows us to get physically present to people and sort of one-to-one personal contact. And that generates a space, a comfortable space, and that makes others, they want them to dialogue more. And online, that's more difficult. That's a good. Algona, any other observation, question from the audience? I wanted to ask what you were talking about before, about the audiences. One of the, we want to reach a certain public, a broader public, not only more than LGBT public. For programming, there's a kind of, in Spain, there's a kind of, there are films that are very niche films for LGBT festivals, but when a film, a good film, or an important film goes to a more general festival, and it is clear LGBT film, many times, if it has a Spanish distribution, they try to flee and trying to present it as an auteur film. So it's an auteur film, and they prefer to go to, and it's more difficult because they don't want to. So the strategy has to be different. So it's kind of aim of trying to take films, more well-known films, but there's a problem of distribution here in Spain. An LGBT film is a niche film. Oh, I don't think it's, it should be, instead of cowboys, let's use a footballer. So it is more difficult for us. It's a challenge to avoid labeling. So, but labeling also has to be used to further the presence of the film. Films that are not just the strategy is often we are going to present it as an auteur film because it's going to get to wider audiences. So it would probably be better if it goes directly to an LGBT film, an LGBT festival, and people would welcome it as such. I don't know. I agree with you. I agree with you. I agree. I'm not sure if I understand it. This is your question, but I agree with you. I think. What I can say is that, and I'm speaking now more as a programmer and producer.
Una de las cosas
One of the
que
things
a mí, por
that
ejemplo, me gustó
I
muchísimo
liked
cuando estuve
a great deal
con
when I
Valentina
was
era
when I
la
was
sensación de,
working with
voy
Valentina.
a traer una película
I'm
que
going to
cambie un poco
bring
la
a film
narrativa
with
típica
narrative,
de
typical narrative
lamentablemente, de
of
las historias trágicas de
tragic
trans.
stories
Y
of
estaba
trans
pensada
people,
desde su
and it
incepción
was
por Casio,
from the
que
very
es queer
beginning.
y que además
From the very beginning,
trabajó prácticamente con todo un equipo
I worked with a
queer,
team that were all
muchísima
care,
investigación, etcétera,
having done the necessary research, etc., etc.
y con el objetivo
And the
inclusive de
aim
poder
was
mostrársela
to
de
show
llegar a un
that
público
film,
a sabiendas justamente de lo que hablabas vos del conservadurismo, etcétera. Lo pensó de tal manera de que
it was thought
no
that
tuviera ciertas escenas como para
there
que no
should,
hubiera
there should not be certain
obstáculos.
scenes so that there would be
Y
certain
esto lo digo
obstacles.
porque en realidad
And I'm saying
de lo
that
que se
because
trata, y creo que
what I think
entiendo
is
tu
important,
pregunta por
and I
ese lado,
understand your question in this sense, is
es
that
que uno bueno, tiene que como
we
programador
have
tiene que
to,
estar
as a
como
programmer,
luchando mucho
we have to
porque haya una
fight
diversidad
constantly
dentro de la diversidad y no
for there to be
quedarse ni
diversity
con una-
within
ni
diversity.
en el cine de autor
So it shouldn't be pure
con
and simple
LGTB o no,
film auteur
uno tiene como,
film.
bueno, que buscar
We have to
esa
look for
amplitud,
that
y yo entiendo, digamos, que a
broadness,
veces,
and I think
bueno,
at times there's a strategy behind a film that says, okay, we're going to go here or here. We don't want to go to these festivals first because they're going to think that the film is this or that. And I can say from experience, from Valentina, that we started with a festival, an Outfest festival that could have determined what kind of film it was once it had gone to that kind of festival, general festival. But our experience shows us that after going to Outfest, in the European premiere was in Warsaw, and then it went to Sao Paulo, and at the same time it continued to go to LGBT festivals. So that in fact we can, I think, that can be demythified, saying if it goes one way and it goes another way, it prevents certain things. What I can say that as a programmer, I try always to, from the point of view, regional point of view, and from an LGBT point of view, I try to bring the greatest amount of stories with the greatest amount of diversity in order to break this myth, to break down these labels, so that it can be called, oh, this film is this kind of film in this kind of country. So I try to break down that kind of labeling and orientation, and that can be done in many places now. Perhaps we still have a long way to go, but there are, of course,
me pasa ahora con la segunda película.
For instance, the second film I'm working on now is called Perfecto da Vida. It's a film that is not sufficiently gay to be called a gay festival, but it's not sufficiently straight for normal festivals. So it was released in Tribeca, now we in Warsaw, but it has happened that, for instance, distributors saying the thing is it's not sufficiently gay, but the story is a story of a teenager who is trying to find out what he is, and that's what we're trying to do, to find adequate spaces. So the markets then tell you, look, we have to be navigating through these waters. I'm not sure whether I understand, I answer your question, but I think it's the work that we have to do constantly, because we all have hurdles and obstacles. We're not sort of carte blanche, we're not blank sheets. So there are moments when I think we all have to take we have to take certain risks, knowing full well, that's happened to me many times with films that I've released in I don't know, in Inta Bruta, Nunca Vas a Estar Solo, an Argentinian film, what was that film, where the guy kills himself at the end? Marilyn. They're all films that were released in the United States, in festivals. Marilyn, I knew it was a film that would probably the audience wasn't going to like, but we have to show these stories. I said, because it's an opera prima as well. I said, you have to
que
take,
hay, como decía Gabriela, y en eso estoy
and as Gabriela was
de
saying,
acuerdo, hay una responsabilidad.
there's a responsibility. We are
Estamos creando espacios
creating
para
spaces
que cuenten
for
historias, entonces
these stories to be told, and we have that
ética
responsibility,
profundamente
ethical
ética,
responsibility,
humana,
human responsibility, deep human responsibility,
cada
and,
uno la asume de
each
distinta
of us
manera,
has
pero
to
bueno,
take it
también
on as we can, as
después
best
uno
we can,
responde, ¿no? Porque
and
en algún momento
and
te
see how
dice
people
cuando estás en
respond.
película. Pero
But
hay que hacerlo. Yo creo
we have
que,
to do it. We have to do it.
Por eso mismo
That's
también
why, as well,
hay que
we have
buscar que
to-
tampoco
we have
se
to-
transforme eso en digamos, esa, y vuelvo a decir, en el caso de Valentina, yo siento que
and in Valentina,
hay
there is
poquito de cambio de
there's
la,
a
de la
bit of a
narrativa y que también es
change in the
importante,
narrative,
porque de nuevo,
and that's also is
cuantas más veces
important
la gente
because
se pueda ver reflejada ahí
the
en
more
esa
people
pantalla,
see
más
themselves
posibilidades
reflected
tenemos de
on the
crear
screen, the
más-
greater the possibilities
más
there are
contadores
of
de historias, más
creating
actores,
further stories,
más,
more actors,
guionistas,
more
más
screenwriters, and more
que se vean
audiences. So
reflejados y que digan,
let them
yo
see
puedo
themselves
ser
on the screen, and then I can be that person who's on the screen.
Something you were talking about theatrical distribution, right? Mostly. There are two things. Some directors don't want to be released as LGBT, that the film should not be released as LGBT. So you have first this aspect, which is being considered by the distributor, and also the distributors, they need to, if they put the film in the theaters, they need to put it in a broader audience, even if they might lose LGBT audience because they will not see it directly. For them to place it in the normal small, I'm talking about Europe. I don't know how it is in Latin America. So we were talking about Spain. So I have the experience that even if it is an LGBT film, because the audience is gray-haired people, they would still make a poster like this. For example, Poppyfield, it's a Romanian film that I distribute. It's not sexy at all. So it's the older normal art house goers can go there and watch it. He didn't want to take our normal poster. He changed the poster so that he would make the LGBT element lower to attract audience. I think it's okay. I understand that you might lose your main target audience, but still, if the distributor does a good job, he can contact the scene, let's say the local LGBT organizations of its city and so on, and he will give the message that it's an LGBT film, or he can organize a party or something. I am okay with it. I don't think that the films are getting lost if they are being marketed as all audiences art house film. And as I said, there are some directors who want to have this political message, and they are behind that. I want it to, my voice and my message must come to the community, and others that sometimes first-time directors that they want to be labeled like LGBT directors only.
Bien, creo. Una última
Okay, I think that's about it. Let's see, have one final intervention. The first thing I want to say is about Eva, about the necessity to create forums and festivals. I want to say we are already in such a forum because of the San Sebastián. We are working on it for years now, for the last few years, and thanks Euskera, thanks this festival, because thanks to them we are beginning to work on this and be present at festival, getting to know each other and create synergies. I wanted to ask about the demands of producers in Latin American cinema who want happy ending films, sexy films, or films that are not trans, and that influences the final production. in terms of what is shot. And I want to ask you, because I have been talking with Latin American filmmakers, and I think yesterday, I think the winner of the Latin American prize last year, she said it's a kind of colonization of European festivals towards Latin American cinema, because very often to be in prestigious European festivals like San Sebastian or in Berlinale, they make a kind of cinema for those festivals, and very often with co-production that are European. So I suppose the conditions for help, for public aid, they also think about these festivals. I want to know if you think that this is true, this is concerning, because people were talking here about colonization in reverse, and does that in any way cohibit freedom and liberty? I think there is a colonization, and we have to work on this. And at the same time, I think they are creating new networks. And if you ask me, this is what I've thought this for 20 years now. I said we have to create spaces, because depending only on European funds was a risk, because one day they're going to tell us no, and we're going to be left with our arse exposed. That's my opinion. That's my personal opinion. I think yes. I love Europe. I am here, but it's a reality. But the dependence is there, and I agree with what you say that we should create material for certain festivals, etc. But I think it's fundamental that we have to create all these other networks, and these synergies that we create among countries. They exist and they should be there, but we have to strengthen them. And it is also true that, unfortunately, for political reasons, the political ups and downs of our region, vicissitudes of our country, it makes it more and more complex, because in many cases we depend on public funds, and today, which are here, but tomorrow can disappear, or if there is a greater degree of precariousness in terms of culture, but that has to do with political policies, cultural policies, which should not be there. Really, it shouldn't be matter what government is in place. They should be there, but that's a kind of utopian vision. I live on Earth, and I know that's not going to happen. But I think we are colonized, yes. I think there's also something that it happens to lots of directors. When they start making their films, and after the third release in San Sebastian, Berlin or Cannes, the possibilities of restriction are more and more restricted. So there's a double concern, because that also generates a kind of suffering in waiting for it to be legitimized from Europe. I laugh at that, because I think there's a kind of all in Argentina, there's a kind of post-Cannes depression. I think that's very, very difficult to deal with, and it has to do with these colonial structures that are there, which are there in all arts, but in cinema very particularly and very specially, and it's very complex to dismantle. And I think there we have to do with generating new different kind of spaces, and outside of the normal. That's it. Bueno, pues we want to thank our guests, Patra, Eve, Gabriela, and Clarissa, for being here with us today. Please, an applause for them. Thank the festival, San Sebastian Festival, for giving us this space, for being here together, to know us and to exchange ideas. Thanks to everyone.